What does art mean to you? Are you a spectator, creator, an enthusiast, or a critic? And what kind of medium captures your attention the most? Art is one of those things that supplies us with an absolutely endless array of variety. It could be music, theater, paintings or sketches, comedic acts, or something on the big screen. We all have our favorites, and some of us just love it all. But if there's one thing common and true to human beings as a species, it's the fact that we love artistic expression. Beyond that, we need it. Scientists have discovered art made by humans since ancient times. We are curious creatures, of course, and since we have brains capable of such feats as imagination, problem-solving, and critical thinking, the act of creating things has pretty much always been part of our basic nature. Now, much of this was born of a practical need to hunt and gather food and supplies to survive way back when, but what's interesting is how communal these acts have been throughout recorded history. We've used art to bring people together for eons, be it a village, small town, or even big cities depending on the project. One of my favorite things about living in Portland, Oregon was how much of the downtown area buildings were covered in murals and huge art pieces. And it wasn't limited to buildings either. Sometimes I'd discover these intricate paintings on the streets and the sidewalks, forcing you to shift your perspective on the world just to enjoy your surroundings. I never knew I could think so hard just walking down the street. Some pieces brought me joy, some sadness, and some of them forced me way out of my comfort zone, challenging my preconceptions of society itself. That's when you really know how powerful art can be. Coeur d'Alene, I'm happy to say, is showing real signs on getting to some semblance of that point. People here truly grasp onto art, and our town's events are indicative of that growth. Whether it's murals, sculptures, huge wood carvings, concerts, or lit crawls, there is true community to be found for art lovers in this town. Now that's great for everyone, but the real and often unsung heroes here are the art teachers, the true art obsessives who teach our kids how to appreciate this ancient way of communicating to the world. My guest today is the wonderful Kerry McGrath. She's, you guessed it, an art teacher. She teaches kids one of my favorite things in the universe, and I'm so thrilled that she took the time to sit with me and talk about just how this relates to creating a sustainable society. During this episode, as with all of my episodes, I encourage you to listen with an open heart and an active mind, because we're talking about one of the most sacred methods of enjoying or sometimes critiquing our surroundings today. So let's dive back into the show with episode 8 of the Sustainable Culture Podcast, Artistic Expression. So we're sitting here with Kerry McGrath. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. I'm so glad you're here.
Me too.
I started calling Kerry Grant for some reason. I have no idea why I associated with you. What, was that like an actor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
An actor.
A man. I don't know where
funny.
Grant came from, but no. Fellow Irish person, hello.
Hello.
Good to have you here. And it's just really good to sit here and talk about the kids. We're going to talk about educating kiddos, especially, or well, more specifically with art, which is what Kerry does. So let's start with the basics first. Tell us about your journey thus far, where you teach, how did you become interested in teaching kids, what do you enjoy the most about it? Just your take and all that. All the things.
Well, I didn't go back to school till I was 31. So my first year back was 2001.
Yeah.
When 9/11 happened.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, it was intense. And I thought I was going to go into nutrition until I started looking at the science requirements and went,
right.
No, that's not happening. And my mom said, Kerry, you need to be a teacher. You're so good with kids. And because my mom said it, I balked at that idea. I was like, no, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But she was right.
It wasn't my idea. Yeah.
It was what I was supposed to do. And I haven't regretted it once. Yeah, so I graduated and got hired right away, which was really fortunate for me.
Wow, that's actually pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and I started at Sorensen before it was a magnet school.
Cool.
Yeah, and my first year I taught first grade, and it was such a learning curve, but it was so good.
First grade, first grade.
Yeah, and I thought I wanted to teach older kids, but it was so good.
Yeah.
So good. And then I did a 2-3 multi-age class, and that was the year they tried to shut Sorensen down, and we rallied.
And when was that?
2006, 2007.
Okay, I wasn't here yet, so I didn't even know that happened. That's
It was a declining enrollment, so we didn't have the growth of the families downtown area like we do now. It was all up north. So they were like, yeah, it's, declining enrollment. We're just going to get rid of this school. Mm-hmm. And the whole community rallied and said, no, you're not.
Right.
We love this school. And so we came up with the concept of this magnet school for the arts and humanities. And there was it was everybody. Mm-hmm. And worked tirelessly to slush out what we needed to really build this school. Mm-hmm. And it's doing great. It's thriving. Yeah,
Sorensen is so valued in this community. Yeah. I mean, everybody seems to really love Sorensen. Everyone wants to get into Sorensen. Yeah. It's such a cool school. I like the fact that we have a magnet school at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some things to that too, but yeah, because I left because my heart's always been with lower income families. So I went to Bora and I was there for 3 years, and it was such a learning curve and such a good experience. Mm-hmm. And then I took a year off work to take care of me because I had personal stuff that had happened. Right. And went, okay, I need to just take care of me for 1 year. Mm-hmm. And then they said, okay, well, you have a job back in the district, but I didn't know what it was going to be. And people kept going, well, are you going to apply? Are you going to do this? And I'm like, no, I'm fine with whatever it is. Just give me kids. I'll be happy. Right. And then they called me and said, okay, your assignment next year is teaching art at Nexa and Ramsey. Yeah. And Nexa is an expeditionary school. Okay. And so it's project-based learning. Okay, cool. Yeah. And I went, yes. Yeah. Yes. This is my dream job.
Hands-on,
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, just teaching art, period, is a dream for me. I got my master's degree in arts integrated curriculum and instruction in 2012 through Lesley University. So it was like a cohort of 12 of us. It was amazing. Mm-hmm. Built some really strong friendships through it and really solidified my philosophy of education and the integral part that the arts play in developing a whole human. And school does a great job of teaching the basics, but when you get the arts included, it changes things because you're hitting multiple learning styles. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing school doesn't touch on because it's archaic. Right. Our school, the way we do school, public school, hasn't changed.
No, not really since it was developed.
No, it hasn't changed since it developed. And so it creates this mindset that's kind of stagnant, really. Mm-hmm. But when you start including the arts and infusing those into what you're already learning, it's a really rich learning experience for kids and for the teachers. Yeah. So
that's really cool. Yeah. I mean, and you're totally right. I mean, when you're able to get your hands on stuff, we're going to talk about that in a bit, but it's so much more, I don't know, there's only all the things. It's so much more engaging. It's easier for people to pay attention because you actually have to physically do something as opposed to just sit there and in a nice, neat line and listen to someone.
Listen to someone lecture, which we don't like that as adults. Why do we force that on our kids? It doesn't make sense.
Every college class I've ever been in that is purely lecture-based, depending on the class. Some classes are more interesting, and some professors are more interesting. Yeah. But, I mean, anytime that it's just like straight lecture, you're going to lose people. I mean, it's just sad that you're just like... I've watched so many times looking around in college classes like, oh, we're losing them. Like,
they're gone.
They're gone. Yeah. The back row's gone.
Even the front row, but they're just keeping their eyes open.
Right.
They have to.
Yeah. Exactly. So as far as well, you kind of touched on some of this. I mean, how has your career affected your perspective on the people in your community or the health of your community?
Oh, man. Being a part of what we did at Sorensen, that took community to make that happen. Right. Truly took community. And it solidified this beautiful thing that happens when people come together for a purpose. Because that's the only time we can have change. And that's the only time we make a difference is when we come together. And it built connections and relationships that I hadn't experienced in my life before.
Really?
Yeah, and it really made me feel rooted. And I was living in Post Falls at the time, but I brought my kids over, got us a place over here. That was actually a house of a parent of kids I taught. And I rented it from them. So that's what happens though. Honestly, my closest friends are parents of kids I've taught. It happens.
That's really cool. I mean, has it changed the way you see human beings in a general sense, or are your observations more, would you say, minor in scale?
Totally changed so much, and it's always evolving, because if you're open and you're willing to listen and hear different perspectives and ideas, you're going to change. I mean, and it's just going to either build what you already believe and solidify it, or open you up to new ideas. So I would say my eyes have been opened. Through
the work you're doing.
Just through teaching. I learned so much from my colleagues and from the district people and from parents. You learn so much from parents. I learned the most from the kids. Like, that's where it is.
It's amazing what kids will teach you. If you just shut up for a minute.
Yeah. Which I need to work on.
No, it's amazing. I mean, because part of what I talk about on this show a lot, often in repetition, is the fact that we have to learn how to listen to each other. We have to learn how to learn from each other again. And I think it's proper to say again, because right now, the age in which we live is just really fascinating in so many ways. But one of the ways is just, and we've talked about this before, about just how crazy it is, how hard it is for people to listen to each other these days, which is really strange, because one of the oldest form of communication in human history is spoken word. So why is it so impossible for some people to just, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of answers, which we're not even going to talk about today.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, that's a whole topic on itself. Probably multiple podcasts for that one.
You bet. I mean, you could probably do a whole show on it.
Yeah.
It's one of the great problems that I'm sort of trying to figure out, and because it's so vast, there's so many things to touch on there.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about teaching kids, that is the future, and
it is.
Kids' imaginations are the future, right?
Totally. They are our future, and we need empathetic, compassionate humans in our world. And for some reason, us adults don't have that right now, and I'm not sure if it's fear-based or if it's, this is what I believe, and I don't want anybody challenging it, and I'm not going to listen to anybody else who has a different perspective. I feel like we've kind of gone in that pendulum swing a little bit.
Yeah, it's awfully strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you see a lot of folks, well, it's almost like we're listening to what we're told about other people.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've mentioned before is that it's important to think about the perspective of where you live in your community. How much of an effort have you made to get involved in your community? How much of an effort have you made, for example, to let's say meet your neighbors? Like, it's amazing to me, and myself included, how few of my neighbors I've actually physically walked over and met. Like
some great ones across the street.
I do. Those guys I know.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I love them.
Those guys I know. They come into the store a lot, and I've met random people throughout the years, but it's so incredible to me how few people know the people that live on their own street. I've had friends of mine that I didn't even realize lived in the same neighborhood, in this neighborhood here.
Right.
And I've just been so surprised so often, and it's really opened my eyes to understand, like, what if something happens? Yeah. What emergencies? We all are like, I have one emergency contact or two emergency contacts, but God forbid someone's breaking into your house,
right?
Or whatever. It's important to understand what a community can offer you.
Right.
I think it's too easy these days to get lost in the what's in it for me mindset.
Yeah, there's so much to that. Like, as you're talking, I'm just thinking of First Sesame Street came into my head.
Yeah.
Who are the people in your neighborhood? Like that just...
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
That's just how my crazy brain works. But, like, you're right. We don't always know our neighbors. Fortunately, this little pod I know well.
This little area
because
here.
I'm actually off the same street, too, just down blocks.
Yeah.
Which you didn't know and I didn't know.
Right. Yeah, fun fact, Kerry and I actually live really close to each other. This interview worked out really, really well.
Yeah, it did.
I was like, oh, hey, just come on over. So here she is, yeah.
Yeah, but so the last few years, this has just been something I've been thinking about a lot, was this fast food industry mindset that we have in our country, where we just expect things immediately.
Yeah, the minor convenience life.
But it's like, it's almost an institutional thing. From the top down in our country. And it's not just fast food, but we just expect immediate results. So we expect it in our education system with our kids.
You bet.
If you do this, then this should happen. But that's not always the case, because not everybody fits in that mold.
Right.
Because we're all unique individuals. And I think that ties into that, where we don't always want to see people as being different than us and still being right.
Right.
Or still being good people. And we don't want to let go of this tunnel vision of, this is the way I live, and you're not gonna speak into it. You don't have that right. Instead of going, it doesn't mean anyone's speaking in or judging. It means that we're just open to learning about one another.
And the amazing thing is, I think once people do get past, at least in my experience, when you're able to allow yourself to get past that border of being afraid to listen to somebody, and again, I don't know if it's purely fear. I know for some people it's fear-based for sure. But for whatever it is, whatever block people have, when they finally are willing to listen to someone and actually really care about what they're having to say, it's actually pretty amazing how beautiful that ends up turning into.
Totally.
It really ends up being a good experience. My family, for example, disagrees on damn near everything. I mean, we all love each other incredibly so, but it's so funny when all of us get together. It's rare that some kind of disagreement, doesn't take place. But we tease each other about it.
Right.
It's not. We're past the point of becoming enemies. Like, that's not even a thought. It's like isolating each other. Why would you do that? It's like, if we disagree, that's part of what makes our relationship so cool, is because it adds a layer of complexity, I would argue, because it makes your relationship really interesting.
Yeah.
If everyone agreed with everything you ever said, I'm not sure how interesting life would be.
It would be boring.
It would be awful.
We don't realize that it would be. I mean, we'd just be like, what's that? I'm thinking of a kid's book, The Giver.
Yes.
It's that type of, and there's so many books that are like that.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone looks the same. Everyone does the same thing. You have specific jobs, specific roles, but it's black and white. There's no color.
It's a rather eerie thought, I would say.
It's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really strange. I've just never really quite understood that.
No, I think there's some distrust stuff with that too, and I think some of it is people are afraid of being judged.
Yeah.
And that's a cultural thing, I think, for us.
I think definitely. I think in America, and I have to be careful with this, but I do think that anyone would agree that we really focus on our own space here. We like to have our own space, our own things, our own houses, our own land.
Oh, yeah.
And that goes back into the very founding fabrics of our country.
Totally.
And that's great and all.
Right.
It really is, but I think it's just very important to remember exactly what you're leaving out sometimes.
Totally.
If you take that to the extreme, maximum.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've kind of got off on a tangent, but you're totally right. What were you going to say?
I had this experience last week, 2 weeks ago at school, and we were doing some Veterans Day projects. And the fifth graders were doing this project, and a couple of kids that came and said, "Oh, so and so wrote that veterans aren't heroes." And I said, okay. And the one girl she goes, well, I guess that's his opinion, so he's allowed that. He's wrong, but it's his opinion.
Right.
Those are her words. And I said, you're right, it's his opinion. And so I talked to this student about it, and he explained why. And I said, I'm not mad at you. You're not in trouble. You have every right to feel the way you do. And we talked some more and gave him some examples of different ways veterans are heroes and personal examples from my family members. And he came to me today and said, can I redo this project because I feel bad that I was so disrespectful.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, what changed your mind? What was the flip for you? And he goes, well, I talked to another teacher and they helped me see it in a different way. I said, okay, that's up to you. But yeah, you totally can do that.
How cool is that?
So mature.
Yeah.
So mature.
And roughly what age was this kiddo?
10.
10.
10, yeah.
10 and understanding that it's okay to be wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
I've always loved, at least in my education, I've loved it when, I mean, it's a challenge for sure. It's always a little ego pop, but who cares? So like when you get your little ego deflated a bit, that is an opportunity. You just gain so much more out of that potentially, but it really does depend on you.
Yeah, it's growth.
Growth.
Yeah, and we had just a cool conversation that day that happened in class.
I bet.
And they said, here's the thing. He's entitled to his opinion.
Right.
I don't necessarily agree with it, but I respect his viewpoint, and I understand where he's coming from and why he's saying this. Because he explained why, and I get it. I still didn't agree with it. And I said, but this is what we call empathy. And when we have empathy in one another for one another, that builds compassion. And when we can build that, we build a community. And so it just ended up in this really cool discussion. And this is art class, crying out loud, but that's teaching. Right. Constantly. This is what you do.
Well, and you know, I think, who was it? I mentioned this episode or this interview to somebody, and I forget who it was now, but someone had asked me, how are you going to tie art class into sustainable communities exactly? And I was like, well, think about it for a sec. Just think about it. Like, art and school in general, but definitely art opens up so many doors, and I know you already know this. Like, it's crazy what you can accomplish with, say, a hard-hitting painting. Or, I mean, so many artists have already done it. Provoked such thought and such statements with such simple things sometimes. Maybe a sculpture or a painting or whatever.
Right. Or a theater production.
Or a poem, or a well-taken photograph. Or, you know, these things are, it's pretty incredible what art can accomplish. So let's move on a little bit. So
no more bird walking?
So I'm sure you've heard people, probably parents, say something like, I'm not an artistic person, or I could never draw or paint or play music or whatever, right? You always hear people go, I don't have the art gene or whatever like that. What's your opinion on that mindset, and how do you respond to those comments?
Everyone's an artist. Everyone is. We're just artists in different ways. Everyone can learn to draw. I mean, we all learn to walk. We all learn to talk. You know, we have the capabilities of doing so, but everyone can learn. And everyone is an artist. I mean, our lives are a piece of art. The way we live it, the way we have relationships with people, communication, all those things are art.
Now that's a beautiful way. I'll stop you there because that's a beautiful way. That's a beautiful way to think of things. I haven't actually thought of it that way. That's really interesting. The whole idea of our lives being an art form in a way.
Yeah, it is.
Now that's fascinating to me because. So we'll pause on that for a second because now I'm like, now you got me, you got my attention on this one because that's really, really interesting. I haven't actually thought of that at all because I think you're really onto something there. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in life. I mean, life is a big freaking mystery a lot of the time. A lot of us have a lot of hard time just getting through the basic version of life.
Right.
And the idea of it being an art form, I mean, can you expand on that a little?
Well, think of it this way, I guess. You know, people write blogs, and a blog would be considered a piece of writing or a piece of art. But who's doing the blogging? It's the person. And the person's usually sharing their story, their history, their lives, and that is their art.
I love how that idea of art being associated with a story. Because it is, isn't it? I mean,
it is,
every good piece of art has a story to tell.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's amazing.
And sometimes they're controversial, and then
you bet.
Which has been going on, and I don't know a lot about what's going on with a piece of art that was just taken down, but I know it's, you know, it sat for 3 years, and then all of a sudden it's gone, and because of...
Which one is it?
It was the one that was a sickle. It was I think down in Riverstone. I'm not positive on that. It was, and the art commission had it put up, and it was done. It was done very thoughtfully, and it was, the piece represented mining, coal mining. People took it offensively as something else, which happens with art. Art stirs the pot often.
Very often.
Makes people uncomfortable. And I'm guilty of it too. It's easy to see something and be offended, which we shouldn't be. It's not intended to hurt anyone.
And it's not about us.
It's not about us. It's about this artist making a statement. And the statement was actually pertinent, especially to this area with the mining that we have here. We didn't have coal mining, but we have mining. And it affected the lives, and it still does, of the people in this community.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that it happened the way it did. And there's a lot of really negative stuff going on with it that's affecting personal lives.
Yeah.
And it kind of just makes you sad that it has to go that far, that people can be that cruel.
It's rather disappointing. It's
we're human beings, and we're all doing the best we can, and we make mistakes in that. But it doesn't mean we have to be cruel or threatening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's taking it an extra step.
It really is. It's sad. Yeah, it's just sad.
Well, that's a fascinating thought. Yeah.
Not talking about that. I was talking about the good stuff.
Let's do some jumping jacks. Let's get up and are you ready, kids? Okay.
Do it.
Yeah, I'm gonna rely on you for that one. You're my distraction like master over here. You're the one who wrangles the cats all day.
I
pretty
do
much. Yeah.
all day.
Thanks for listening to the show today, folks. Taking a quick break here to let you know that there is now an official Patreon page where you can donate whatever you can to support the show. Just go to patreon.com/sustainableculturepodcast to do so. Any little bit helps, and it all supports the show's long-term growth. This is, of course, completely optional, but is certainly much appreciated as I do this show on my own spare time. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Kerry as we continue to explore artistic expression in our community. There's a multitude of studies regarding art and how it affects the brain. Okay, we kind of barely lightly touched on this sort of earlier. You were talking a little bit about this. But before we really get into that, I'd love to hear a testimonial or two from you, maybe. How have you witnessed art affecting your students' lives, even at young ages? Now, you talked about one story, which was wonderful. I'm sure you've seen a multitude of tangible results, how art affects people.
Because there's a multitude of learning styles. And when we teach in a classroom, we don't always tap into all those learning styles. I was one of those kids that I guess I would have been labeled an indigo kid. I just think and process completely different.
Right.
And I struggled in school until college, and I had a great teacher, Mr. Nelson, down at NIC, math teacher, who picked up on some things that no one else had picked up on. Flipping numbers and lots of transpositions, and it helped me, like, greatly. It changed my world a little bit. But kids, I've watched kids who had this student, it was 3rd grade, struggling reader. He could read, just not fast. And we do these time tests back to that whole immediate. Yeah. And his comprehension was great. And this kid is amazing. So he really got into juggling, got into it. And he would juggle. And then he started juggling on a globe. And then he was juggling while on a unicycle, and then playing the harmonica while juggling on a unicycle or on the globe.
This sounds like an act straight out of Portland, Oregon.
Exactly. Welcome to Portland.
Yeah.
He actually has his own business now based on this.
Wow.
Yeah. It flipped his reading. So that cross-hemispheric right to left brain was happening for him when he started doing an art.
Now you're touching on some really interesting stuff, actually, that is going to be a whole other episode that I've actually... because actually it's really fascinating how... and I've actually interviewed someone from this company already, Spolstra Family Chiropractic. I don't know if you know them.
I know who they are. Yeah, I don't know them personally, but I know who they are,
Gotcha. Dr. Hannah did an interview with me one time, and we talked about women's health, but one of the programs that goes on at Spolstra is now I don't want to. I'll just very vaguely paraphrase on this because I'm not involved with their program, but essentially they work with a lot of kids with all kinds of different learning disabilities, and what they do is they practice brain activities and stuff that is meant to exercise specific parts of your brain, and it's amazing the results that are coming out of that.
The research on that is huge.
Right.
There's a whole thing that came out of Seattle called the brain dance.
Okay.
I'll have a book. I can loan it to you.
I'd love to read it.
It's really fascinating stuff.
The brain dance.
And it's just movements that you do that are very specific and targeted. To, like, for tracking, like following one thumb up, following it down, following the other thumb up, and crossing your hemispheres, so crossing your body, and spinning certain ways. It's very targeted. And there's so much research that backs that. I can't give you the exact research because I don't have that locked in my memory.
Right, it's not right here.
That's not how my brain works, but the arts do that. They do that. Kids sit for, 7.5 hours a day.
It's such a crazy long time for kids.
It is. Yeah. I mean, PE's once a week. Mm-hmm. They get their recesses, but it's minimal. Like the physical activity that happens in schools now is so minimal. Mm-hmm. So you get a kid up and say, so I'm really into arts integration. So we'd take a song, this great song from this old movie that was called, what was it called? The Point. And the movie's called The Point, and it's from the 70s. And Harry Nilsson does the music for it. And one of his songs is like really vivid. And so our teacher did this with us in our master's program where we had to do tableaus for the different parts of the song and move into 3 different positions of the tableau for the stanzas. So when I did that with my students, they're physically showing their understanding of what those words mean.
That's interesting.
And it takes the comprehension to a whole different level, especially for kids who are kinesthetic learners that have to move to learn.
And I'm so glad you mentioned the kinesthetic thing. I'm actually a kinesthetic learner myself, which is kind of, if I understand it right, it's a mixture of show me visually and show me hands-on. It's a mixture of the two.
Or doing it with your body. Yeah.
Right. You need instruction as well as doing it. Yeah. It's a mixture of the two. And it really just it's actually a really fun way for me to learn. I mean, granted, it's the way that I am. Right. Well, a lot of kids who learn this way, it's so immersive. Yeah. And it exercises so many different parts of your brain when you get immersed like that.
And if you understand that that's how you learn, then you can go into any learning environment and know what you need to do for you.
Right, and you can make that known.
Powerful.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. That's empowering for a student to go, I'm a visual spatial learner. Mm-hmm. I need to draw. I have students who when I was teaching in a classroom, they would doodle while I was talking. I'm okay with that because I'm the same learner. I have to doodle. It helps me focus on the speaker. Right. And it may look like I'm not listening, that I'm disengaged. I'm not at all. I'm completely focused.
Yeah, I was a doodler too. Yeah, just sit here messing around.
But it helps me focus on what's being said. And I can return to doodles and go, oh yeah, that's...
You know what's interesting? I had so I worked for Whole Foods for a little while, when I lived in Portland, in fact. And they had one of the coolest training programs, or rather orientation programs that I've ever seen. We were all the new hires were sitting in a big room, and it was a pretty typical new hire thing in the way that it's like, here's what the company is all about, here's our policies, things like that. And so it was like a day or two, I think it was a day-long class, and one of the things they did, I've never seen this done before, but they had these big old containers. It looked like a kindergarten class because there was just all these fidget toys.
Oh yeah, those are
rad. A whole bunch. They had the little pipe cleaner things. They had Kinects. They had all these different things, different toys you could play with while you were listening to that. And it was actually pretty incredible how attentive everyone was in that class. Yeah. I was sitting here fidgeting the whole time because of,
But you were engaged with the speaker.
But I was completely engaged. Yeah, otherwise, I would have been tapping on my leg. I would have been
fidgeting with the pin.
It would have been something. It would have been. Yeah. That right there.
Yeah, no, I do that too. I'm the same way.
It's like, to the begrudge of everyone else around you.
Yeah, or the tapping. I'm a tapper.
Yeah.
And I don't even realize I'm doing it. It's a pencil, or I've learned to move my toes inside my shoes.
Oh, gosh,
and I teach kids that, like, no one's going to know.
No one's going to know, yeah.
Just one can see. You're not going to get in trouble. Do it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's amazing. The people who have really tapped into that, I think they're seeing some really awesome results.
They are. I mean, you look at Google. Google's workspace.
Mm-hmm. I actually used to live in the Bay Area. Yeah. And I've driven by that campus a few times. Yeah. Which, by the way, is incredibly massive. Yeah. For any campus to be. Right. But, they absolutely have figured out, like, because I actually used to work with a guy whose wife worked for Google. Oh, okay. And so I heard a lot of stories about things that they had. I worked for a music lesson facility at the time, and I was trying to get Google as a client. Right. to have like a discount, thing. Right. So it was like, come on, just send all your employees to my music program.
Give me discounts on the Googler.
And in typical Google fashion, they were like, oh, we have a music lesson program for our employees. Right. They have that. They have a bowling alley. They have a tennis court. They have all this stuff, right? They have figured out, and of course Google would, like a lot of these innovative companies have figured out a long time ago.
Because they're outside the box.
Right.
Their mindset is completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's actually a really good segue, because there's actually several different studies which do claim that art, when practiced at any skill level, actually stimulates what some have called what I've read as the conceptual relations in our mind.
Yeah.
Art historian, who I just researched, Gregory Minasale, I'm not sure if that's correctly pronounced.
I don't know.
But he has claimed, for example, that people view conceptual art sort of like a puzzle, which therefore allows your brain to treat it like solving a mathematical equation or a proof. What do you think about that?
Totally. Yeah. I totally agree with that. Well, art and math are so connected. It's crazy. There's just so much to it that is so connected, especially when you talk about musical art and even just art. I mean, it's math. It's puzzling. I totally agree with that.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. There's a program at the Mac Museum, and I was fortunate to get to be a part of it a few years ago through Sorensen, called Visual Thinking Strategies. And it's a way of talking about art, but it's not you talking about art to students. It's you showing a piece of art and allowing kids or students to talk, or adults, about the art. I would use it in my classroom before I was going to do a specific, I can't even talk, specific, there you go, story with my kids, and I would find a picture that went with that, like a painting.
Right.
And I'd show it to them, and I'd go, what do you see? What do you notice? And I'd just let them talk, and they go, oh, I see, like, there's a man. And I go, oh, you think this shape here is a man? Yeah. Oh, well, that's a boat. So you think this right here looks like a boat. So you're not confirming or denying, you're just letting them go. And the vocabulary development that happens from that, and the conversations and the stories that they start creating in their head of what's really happening, is what it's about.
Conceptual visualization.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And
that is interesting.
But it does, I mean, all of that is like solving a problem.
It really is.
Yeah.
I when I read it about an equation, but I think is more accurately a proof. In proofs, now I'm a math tutor, so I'm a total math nerd, but in proofs, you're basically given the answer, and you have to explain why that is the way that it is, which is much harder than solving an equation. That's why they don't do proofs until much later in math. But I love the idea.
You lost me at proofs.
I know. Every time I'm like, I'm a math tutor, people are like,
No, I actually love math.
Yeah.
I didn't until I was an adult.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, once I started getting into advanced math classes, and this is where I show my total nerdism, is where I really started to enjoy it. Because you started to, when I got to integral calculus. Right. Which is, I think, Calc 2 for most people. Right. I think NSC and U of I does it in like a big Calc 1 thing. Anyway, it's really interesting how long a lot of those equations are. And I remember asking my professor one time, hey, our equations look like, the movie ones. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, all the science-y movies where, like, there's stuff in the background. It's like there's some humongous equation in the background. You don't know what's going on back there, but they like are making a spaceship. And he's like, he kind of laughed, but he goes, actually, that's not that far. Right. We're getting there. And that's is pretty cool stuff. Yeah. And what was interesting is I wanted to play music more when I was getting into more advanced math.
That's because you were making the connections mathematically in your head.
And I was using that same part of my brain.
Yeah.
Which I didn't realize at the time, but But that's pretty cool stuff. I mean,
well, you do know that when you play a musical instrument, you're using the maximum amount of your brain at one time that you can possibly use.
Right.
Which is both hemispheres.
Isn't that interesting?
It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating to me.
Yeah, I want to do an entire episode on music because it's so deep.
It is. No, it
so
is.
So deep. Yeah, and I've heard, there's lots of really cool TED Talks and papers that I've read about how music and the brain works and how it's connected to math and
it is.
How it's connected to actually problem solving in general. It's really fascinating how you can read about this, but it's also kind of unfortunate how few people kind of go into that, which is kind of what I was mentioning earlier. The people who say, "Oh, I could never do that."
They can.
But they can.
They can.
There's plenty of studies that actually show the really fascinating, huge impact that art has on people of any, whatever art platform you use.
Right.
You don't even have to be good at it. You can actually be outright new and beginner at it, I should say, and still get the same benefit than if you were really skilled at it already.
Totally. my students are always going, do you like this? Do you like this? And I go, do you like it? I won't answer them because they want my affirmation, and it isn't my affirmation they need, it's theirs. And I go, do you like it? Because we do this to ourselves, and we're always seeking this outside affirmation instead of trusting and believing in ourselves.
Oh, you're touching on the most awesome subject for this question right here.
Okay.
So how do you think... That's such a good segue. I love the segue. That's so great. I love a good segue. So how do you think that teaching art to kids, or art in general, fits into the goal of building a sustainable community?
Oh, man. I think we are watching it happen. We're watching it happen. Coeur d'Alene, just the Downtown Arts Association, just the downtown, what's happened in downtown Coeur d'Alene. We have this beautiful arts community.
We really do here.
That's amazing. And you've got people like Jenny Hegstead, who started Emerge. And that started she was a Sorensen parent who was helping bring Morris Cleary, who is an artist who just passed away. He was a beautiful man.
Oh, right.
Did these beautiful wooden books. And he worked with us. So Jenny and I worked with him as our first artist in residence, our second, at Sorensen. And people like her, Art Spirit, I mean, we lost a beautiful human there. And then Blair Williams is taking that over, and she's doing a great job. She's also a Sorensen parent. I'm
so glad that shop is still there, too.
Oh, man, Art Spirit.
A lot of people wondered about that when that was switched.
It was really sensitive, I think, to a lot of the community members. But he helped build what's happening in our arts community. And when you have a school right down here that's so integrated into the arts, it feeds into that. But our community is bigger than just downtown. And we have these programs, Lake City Playhouse, kind of near and dear to the heart. I was on that board for a while. We almost lost it a few years ago. Those people worked hard to bring it back. I mean, that's theater and musical theater.
Now, I have such a soft spot for all art, really, but for theater, though.
Yeah.
Because I'm a performer. I like to be in front of people. Yeah. I get that.
Yeah.
It is so precious to me, and it's so unfortunate how many schools around the country have just nixed theater.
Wow, yeah,
nixed arts in general.
Let me hear something interesting. So about 7 years ago, I had the opportunity. A friend needed to travel back east, and she didn't want to go alone for business. It was gonna be 7 days, something like that. She's like, "Do you want to go with me?" And I go, "Well, I have to work." But I got a hold of a school and was able to go visit. And I had to still pay for sub.
Yeah.
But, it was worth it. Anyway, I went to the school in Hartford, Connecticut, and it was a performing arts school. And they were a failing school. Inner city, Hartford, Connecticut. And there was a federal program that had come out that saved these inner city schools, and they became art schools. And the transformations that happened in those kids and in those small communities were huge. And their scores went skyrocketing. Sorensen's scores have gone skyrocketing.
Right.
That's because we're not just teaching, we're connecting. And those connections are huge for kids. And we need them as adults.
As adults, too,
I cannot learn if I can't apply what I'm learning to something I already know. I have to have that connection, or it doesn't stick. And with kids, they're the same way.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm alone in that.
No.
Learning.
You're absolutely not.
And it's huge. And to see that happen, to watch this failing school shine as a beacon in their community was huge. And we're seeing it happen. I mean, the arts we have to have them. And I mean, look what's happening. The theater here, we've got Aspire now. We've got CYT.
Yeah.
Lake City Playhouse. There's another Redwood production, I think, or something like that. That's a brand new one.
And I think Croc Center's doing another one.
Croc Center usually is with CYT or Aspire.
Oh, are they? Okay, cool.
They use the space. But just that alone, I had a student who struggling reader, and theater motivated him because he had to memorize his lines, and he wanted to be in the theater because he loved it. It was his passion.
Oh, man, yeah.
So it dipped into his school. It dipped into his education. So those are crossing over. I mean,
right.
I've watched so many people, so many children, and now some of them are adults now. It's crazy. But without that,
yeah, I mean,
they would have been lost in the mix.
Definitely. And you look at this stuff, and there's so many unfortunate instances where there's parents who don't look at a lot of the art stuff as part of the I guess for lack of a better term, intellectual side of education.
Right.
Because it's so sad that they look at it that way. Because when you're looking at that, I mean, they have to memorize. You're talking about memorization. Mm-hmm. How hard it is to memorize. I don't remember anyone's phone number anymore.
It's not just memorization, though, but you're not just memorizing lines. You're memorizing placement on a stage.
Placement.
Songs.
Intonation. How you're supposed to pronounce things.
Connection with your...
body language.
Yeah, everything. And how you're connecting with your peers.
Right.
There is so much to that.
Acting is hard.
Yeah.
What you're acting well is really difficult. Yeah. You know, like... Even just, I've even learned just in doing the podcast, you know, just, it's really interesting how forming things and making sure everything is doing that, you know, like any kind of acting or performing is much harder than people even realize.
Totally.
And it practices those really, really deep parts of your brain, you know, like.
For people like me, like I can talk in front of a group of kids all day long. Give me a gym full of kids. I'm fine.
Right.
You throw the adults in there, I'm like, I got back from Ireland, I think, on May 18th, and on May 19th, I did the lit crawl.
Yeah.
And emerged, and I read some of my poetry that was pretty raw stuff from a really rough time I went through.
Oh, yeah.
And I just went, I'm doing this. And I put it out there, and they said, yeah, we're going to have you. And I was like, oh. I think I have to actually read this stuff.
Out loud?
Out loud. But that community is so supportive.
It sure is, yeah.
And I had people come up to me and going, hey, I saw you at that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That really meant a lot to me. And I went, all right. That confirmed it for me. It's so important for us to be raw and vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And the easiest way to do that is through the arts, because you have to be. It's very personal. It's very deep.
Yeah,
if you're going to... It's a part of you that you're sharing and exposing to the world or to your community.
Right.
And it makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability is a strength.
Oh, I love that.
It's a strength.
That's powerful stuff there.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome.
Thanks, Kerry. Gosh. Regular Gandhi over here.
Oh, yeah, people are going to be like, I know her.
Now, there's many opinions out there from parents to family members about what needs to change in our education system.
Right.
Whoa now. Here we are. But I'm curious to see, and we don't have to go too deep into this. This is a big subject, but we don't. But I'm just curious what you'd like to see happen as a teacher in general. You know, what do you think are some of the biggest, shall we say, areas of opportunity here?
If we can train our teachers to infuse the arts, and I like the word infuse, because it's not isolated. Mm-hmm. Integration is sometimes isolated.
It's part of what you're teaching.
But if you're infusing it, you're making it just blend in. And if we can do that with what we're teaching to kids, the learning is going to be so rich and rewarding. And I'm really passionate about it. And I'm fortunate to work at places where they allow me to be me.
Right. That's true.
And ask for, how can we, let me help you with that. Mm-hmm. I got lots of ideas. Let me share them.
Yeah.
I get excited about that. I get really excited, maybe a little crazy. It's my passion, though. It's what I really value, and I wish I had some of it. I went to a private Catholic school as a little kid, but we had a lot of arts opportunities there, and we had theatrical productions every year.
Right.
And those things I'll never forget.
Right.
They're stuck. I mean, I remember dyeing yarn wool with my sister who wanted to do it all natural, like artichoke for green and beets for the red.
Oh, how cool.
Different things for, and building a small loom and learning how to weave, because this family who raised sheep came in and talked to us about what wool's used for. Right. So those connections, that was third grade. Mm-hmm. And I'm old. But I remember that vividly. Yeah. And I can see my little loom, my little weaving.
You can remember it vividly, yeah.
And
I know what you mean.
We had this a company come in that was puppeteers, and we learned how to make puppets. I remember those things. They stuck with me, but they helped the problem solving, the critical thinking, the collaboration, those things that places like Google thrive off of. Right. That's what skills are brought to the table when we add the arts into education.
So my last question
comes straight from the heart for me. What wisdom would you share with the parents of artistic children, or just children in general, in regard to allowing our communities to become more prosperous and more sustainable over the long term?
Oh, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know. No.
Yeah. I guess we're done.
You just answered that question. No. Well, they're not going to be sustainable without the children being involved, because who's the next generation? I mean, that's just a given. That's, hands down. We know this. We know the answer to that one.
Right.
That's knowledge based.
Right.
But people, like the whole offensive over arts thing, don't be offended because it's not aimed towards you. And allow yourself to be opened up and expanded by it, because sometimes the lesson in there is bigger than the problem you're seeing. Does that make sense?
It sure does.
Yeah, and the value of that is huge. And if we can continue to allow our kids to be a part of that, imagine what our world's going to be like. It's going to be rich, because we're going to have a lot of empathy and compassion and people understanding.
You bet.
Yeah. I mean, you just look at, I don't know, things like Hamilton and what's happened there, and you see kids talk about it. Or we need our kids to be a part of what our communities are doing, because without that, they're not rooted or grounded. And who's going to continue building our community? I mean, we're going to get new people in that have great ideas too, and we want that.
Right.
We want that. Sometimes it's not fun and it's uncomfortable because it's a rub of what we've always done and what we know. We want that. But we want people who want to continue this in our community.
Right.
That's our kids.
It's our kids. And I would even add to that if we are pushing for our kids to be involved in our community, I think any parent really wants their kids to be involved.
I would hope so. Yeah.
At least I would sure hope so.
Yeah.
If we're fighting for that so hard, we're also fighting for, I guess, the opposite of isolationism. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because we fight so hard at the same time to isolate ourselves.
Yeah,
so I think it's important to realize the dichotomy there. Like that's something we need to be careful of, and totally. I think it's really interesting how the same people that really push their kids to get involved are the same people who try and be uber independent.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember what we're teaching our kids versus the example we're setting for them.
Yeah, that's not that vulnerability piece. You just tapped right back into it.
Yeah.
People have a hard time with that. It's scary. And they think it's a weakness. And that if you're independent and alone, you're strong. It's not true.
Right.
If you're independent and alone, you're alone.
You're just alone.
You're just alone. But when you can be vulnerable and you can allow your community to be a part of your life, and you can reach out and be a part of that community, your life is richer and your community is stronger. Not that you're doing it for that reason, but that's what happens. We have to be vulnerable. Period.
It's true.
Yeah.
Kerry McGrath, ladies and gentlemen. Here she is. Thank you so much for coming. This was such a fun conversation. I have, the biggest soft spot for art. I it's everything to me. It has been in my life, and I can't thank you enough for contributing to this little podcast of mine and really trying to make this
thanks for inviting
more.
me. This was fun.
Well, I'm glad you had a good time, and if any of you guys have any questions that you would like to ask myself or Kerry, please do send them in. It's sustainableculturepodcast@gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram. You can go to Facebook, all that good stuff. Please do let us know if you have any, anything that you'd like to add to this conversation. This is a conversation that is surely not ending now.
I hope not.
Absolutely not. And I hope to do more episodes on art and different factions of art, if you will, in the future. So thanks again for coming over. Cheers.
Cheers. Oh, I'm empty.
The artistic capabilities of human beings rest within each one of us. Some of us were lucky enough to be encouraged to explore these tendencies early on or throughout our lives, and some of us don't get the chance until we're well into adulthood. But it's never too late to learn something artistic, and I would even say it's crucial that we do. Art is the key to opening our minds, and such a gateway into unlocking our empathic abilities. If we can empathize, we can learn, and if we can learn from each other, then sustaining a society gets a whole lot easier. So let's practice it together as often and enthusiastically as we can. Thanks again for listening to the show today. If you liked what you heard, please share with your friends and family on social media. And remember, you can always find the Sustainable Culture Podcast on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also remember, you can now donate to the podcast on patreon.com/sustainableculturepodcast. Have a safe and happy New Year, everybody. Have tons of fun bringing us into 2020. And as always, I'm Jet McLaughlin, and I'll see you next time.